Stephanie Miller's retirement was peaceful until a local fisherman vanished. His boots were left neatly by the door. She'd seen that signature before. It was professional. The bell above the door of the whale's tail jingled its familiar, cheerful tune. Stephanie Miller looked up from the latest Nordic noir novel she was pretending to read and offered a warm, practiced smile. "Morning, Frank." "Your Robert B. Parker came in." Frank, a retiree with a cap that read USS something or other, grunted in appreciation, already pulling his wallet from his back pocket. The shop smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and the faint, damp salt air that seeped in from the harbor. "You'd have it, Stevie. You're quicker than Amazon." He laid the cash on the counter. Stephanie didn't need to count it. Frank always paid exact change, down to the penny. "They have algorithms, Frank." "I just have a good memory," she said, sliding the crisp new Spencer novel into a paper bag. She noticed the fresh grease stain on his thumb and the way his eyes darted toward the mystery section. "And if you're looking for something to follow it, don't bother with the new one by Patterson." The ghostwriter phoned it in. "Try the Connolly on the end cap. You'll like the ending." Frank blinked, a little startled, then chuckled. "You're a mind reader, you know that?" "Just a bookseller, Frank," she said, her smile never wavering. The door jingled shut behind him, leaving her in the quiet hum of the shop. She let out a slow breath, the pleasant mask dissolving into a blankness only she could see. From her stool behind the counter, she had a perfect sight line of the whole room. She knew which floorboard by the poetry section creaked, could track a customer's entire path through the store by the soft rustle of pages, and could tell the time by the angle of the sun hitting the biography shelf. She had cataloged it all. It was a prison of her own making, and every detail was a bar. The morning dragged on. She rearranged the local interest table for the third time, her movements efficient and economical. She wiped a non-existent smudge from the glass of the front door and watched the world outside. Gary, from the salty dog across the street, was hauling a keg off a delivery truck, his movements strong and easy. He saw her, waved with a grin. She gave a small, polite wave back. A young woman came in, looking lost. "I need a gift for my mom," she said, chewing her lip. "She likes books." Stephanie took her in. The expensive yoga pants, the phone clutched like a lifeline, the slight desperation in her eyes. "A tourist. Is she dealing with your father's recent retirement?" Stephanie asked, her voice gentle. "Finds him underfoot all the time?" The woman's eyes went wide. "How did you know that?" "Lucky guess," Stephanie said, already moving toward the fiction section. She pulled out a sleek hardcover. "This. It's funny, it's sharp, and it will make her feel seen. He'll probably borrow it when she's done." The transaction was completed with a flood of gratitude. Stephanie placed the bills neatly in the cash drawer, aligning all the president's faces the same way. Another puzzle solved. Another minor crisis averted using skills better suited for profiling enemy assets than recommending beach reads. The emptiness yawned wider. She sat back on her stool, the quiet of the shop pressing in on her. The only sound was the soft tick of the regulator clock on the wall and the distant cry of a gull. She picked up her Nordic noir, but the words blurred on the page. Another hour until she could justify closing for lunch. Another identical hour after that. The bell jingled again, shattering the silence. Stephanie looked up, the customer service smile automatically reforming on her lips. It was Brenda O'Malley from the Friday night book club. But Brenda wasn't smiling. Her face was pale, her eyes red raw and wide with a panic so profound it instantly vaporized the last of Stephanie's boredom. Brenda O'Malley didn't just walk in, she stumbled through the door as if the weight of the world had shoved her from behind. The cheerful jingle of the bell sounded like a cruel joke. Her face was a mess of blotchy red and pale white, her eyes wide and swimming with a terror that was utterly out of place in the cozy bookshop. "Stevie, oh Stevie." Stephanie was off her stool in an instant, the paperback forgotten. She moved around the counter, her steps quick and silent. She didn't reach for a hug. Brenda looked like she might shatter at the touch. Instead, Stephanie guided her to a worn armchair in the reading nook, her hand firm on the woman's trembling elbow. "Brenda, breathe. What's happened?" Stephanie's voice was low, calm, a steady anchor in the sudden storm. It was a tone she hadn't used in 5 years. Brenda collapsed into the chair, her breath hitching. She wrung her hands, a crumpled tissue clenched between them. It's Mike. He's gone. He didn't come home last night. The words hung in the air. Stephanie's mind, so adept at filling quiet spaces with trivial deductions, went utterly still. She pulled up a wooden chair and sat facing Brenda, her posture attentive, her own hands resting calmly on her knees. Okay, start from the beginning. Did you call Chief Doug? Of course I called Doug. Brenda's voice was sharp with frayed nerves. He said Mike probably just went on a bender with the boys after a bad day on the water. Said he'd turn up sheepish and hungover by lunch. She shook her head violently, a tear finally escaping down her cheek. But he didn't. He wouldn't. Not without calling. Not after. She trailed off, but Stephanie understood. Not after the cancer scare 2 years back. Not after they'd promised each other no more secrets. His truck is still down at the pier, Brenda continued, her voice dropping to a haunted whisper. I went down there this morning. His thermos was on the seat, still half full. Cold. She took a shaky breath, the next detail seeming to confuse her as much as scare her. And his boots, his good rubber boots. He'd taken them off and left them there, side by side, neat as you please, right by the driver's door. The hum of the refrigerator in the back room suddenly seemed very loud. Stephanie didn't move a muscle, but something cold and sharp uncoiled in her gut. A missing person was one thing. A man leaving his vehicle was another. But a fisherman taking off his boots? Voluntarily? On a cold pier? That wasn't a choice. That was a procedure. The ordinary world of large print novels and overdue fines receded, replaced by the stark, familiar grammar of violence. The cozy bookshop felt like a set, a flimsy facade. She kept her voice even, professional. Neatly by the door, she repeated, not a question, but a confirmation. Brenda just nodded, fresh tears welling. It's not like him, Stevie. It's not right. You notice things. People talk to you. Please. You have to help me. Stephanie looked at Brenda's desperate, pleading face, then past her, through the shop window to the peaceful, oblivious street outside. The quiet she had so desperately craved now felt like complacency. She let out a long, slow breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. All right, Brenda, she said, her voice quiet but firm. The decision was made in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Let's see what we can find out. The bell jingled again as the door to the whale's tail shut behind Brenda, leaving Stephanie alone in a silence that now felt charged and brittle. The image of Mike's neatly placed boots was burned onto her retina. It was a detail so small, so illogical for the context, that it screamed. In her old life, illogical details were the only things that ever mattered. She moved on autopilot. She flipped the open sign to closed and twisted the deadbolt with a solid, satisfying thunk. The familiar ritual of closing up shop usually brought a sense of relief. Now it felt like preparation. She stood at the window, watching the quiet street. Gary was sweeping the sidewalk in front of the salty dog, whistling. A couple of gulls fought over a scrap of bread. Everything was normal. Everything was wrong. She couldn't unsee it. A professional grab was clean. No struggle. You approach a man sitting in his truck, you tap on the window with a badge, real or fake, and you get him to step out calmly. You tell him it's a routine check, you need him to come down to the station. And then you tell him, politely, to please take off his boots. It's a power move, a tiny, immediate demonstration of control. It says, I am in charge, you will comply. And then they walk him away in his socks, disoriented and off balance, both literally and figuratively. It was textbook. And it was happening here. Her heart was a steady, heavy drum against her ribs. This wasn't her problem. She was Stevie Miller, bookseller. She sold paperbacks and recommended romances. She called Chief Doug. That's what a normal person would do. But Chief Doug thought it was a bender. And the part of her that was still Stephanie, the part that had spent 2 decades assessing threats, knew Doug was wrong. Dead wrong. She found herself pulling on a worn windbreaker from the hook in the back room. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. It was just a walk. A concerned neighbor taking a stroll down to the pier to see if maybe Mike had dropped his wallet, that's all. The salt-tinged air hit her face as she stepped outside. The sun was bright. She nodded to Mrs. Gable, who was watering her window boxes, and forced a casual wave to Gary. He paused his sweeping. "Everything all right, Stevie? You look like you lost your best friend." "Just need some air, Gary." "Too much coffee," she called back, her voice light. The lie came as easily as breathing. She walked with her hands in her pockets, her eyes not seeing the quaint shops, but scanning the environment automatically, sight lines, blind spots, potential ambush points. Old habits etched deep. The fish pier was quieter now, the morning rush over. Mike's truck, an old blue Ford, sat alone at the far end. It looked forlorn. She approached slowly, her senses dialed up to a frequency she'd long since muted. She could smell diesel, rotting bait, the ocean. She didn't look in the truck windows. Instead, she paced a slow, wide circle around it, her gaze on the weathered planks of the dock. She saw cigarette butts, a broken bottle cap, a tangled length of fishing line. Then she saw it. Half-crushed near the front tire, but unmistakable. A cigarette butt, white with a distinctive gold band. Not a common American brand. A Ukrainian brand. Prima. The kind Markov smoked. A calling card, or just a careless mistake from a man arrogant enough to think he'd never be tracked to a sleepy town in Massachusetts. Stephanie didn't pick it up. She just stared at it, the final piece clicking into place with a soundless, devastating finality. The theory was now a fact. The suspicion was confirmation. She turned and walked back toward her shop, her pace quickening. The cozy world of books was gone. The hunt was on. Back inside the whale's tail, the silence was no longer empty. It was a command center. Stephanie stood motionless behind the counter, her fingers resting on the worn wood. The image of the gold-banded cigarette but was seared into her mind. Markov. The name was a cold stone in her gut. He wasn't just in her country, he was in her town. And he'd taken one of her people. She needed to see the inside of that plant. Police wouldn't get a warrant on a hunch and a foreign cigarette. Asking nicely was out of the question. That left the oldest trick in the book, a confident lie. A slow smile touched her lips, devoid of warmth. It was the smile of a card player finally dealt a good hand after a long, losing streak. She moved to the back office, a small room smelling of paper dust and ink. She pulled open a drawer filled with shipping supplies and found a half-used sheet of laminating pouches and a retired library printer. 15 minutes later, she was examining her handiwork. The badge was comically flimsy, the seal a slightly blurry clip art image of a bald eagle she'd found online. The title read, Massachusetts Board of Health and Safety, Interim Field Inspector, S. Miller. It was the kind of badge that wouldn't withstand a second glance from a real cop, but it was perfect for intimidating a low-level plant manager. She changed into a pair of sensible khakis and a navy blue windbreaker, the universal uniform of low-level government drones everywhere. She grabbed a clipboard, a pen, and, for a final, absurd touch, a digital meat thermometer from her kitchen drawer. The Atlantic Sustainable Seafood Plant was a hulking, corrugated metal building that smelled overwhelmingly of salt, fish guts, and industrial bleach. A nervous-looking man in a too-tight polo shirt embroidered with the company logo, Keith, according to his name tag, met her at the reception desk. His eyes flicked to the badge she flashed a little too quickly to read. Keith. Stephanie Miller, Board of Health. We've had an anonymous complaint. Gotta do a walkthrough. Standard procedure. She kept her tone bored, slightly inconvenienced. Keith's Adam's apple bobbed. A complaint? About what? Sanitation protocols. Let's start with your hand-washing stations, she said, already moving past him, her eyes not meeting his, but cataloging everything. The security camera in the corner, the 2 exits she could see, the hum of a large refrigeration unit. She made a show of scribbling nonsense on her clipboard. She poked the thermometer into a barrel of ice-holding mackerel. 34.2 degrees. Pushing it, Keith. She frowned at a barely visible smudge on a stainless steel table. You're using the recommended ammonia-based solution for the surface? The one listed in subsection C, paragraph 4 of the state code. Keith, flustered, stammered, I'd have to check the manual. You do that, she said, not breaking stride. Her target was the large, industrial freezer unit at the back. Its heavy door was secured with a heavy bolt, but no padlock. Promising. As she passed a small, enclosed office, she saw a bank of monitors showing security feeds. One was pointed directly at the employee parking lot, another at the main entrance. A third was dark. A blind spot. All right, Keith, I think I've seen enough for now, she said, her voice all bureaucratic finality. I'll be filing my report. Expect a follow-up. She was back in her car before he could form a full sentence, the ridiculous thermometer on the passenger seat. The humor of the performance faded, leaving behind the cold, hard intelligence she'd gathered. She had the layout. She had the security sight lines. And she was now certain that freezer was where they were keeping Mike. She drove toward town, her mind already weaving a new plan, one that wouldn't involve a laminated badge. She needed to get back to her shop, to her maps, to the quiet space where she could think. As she turned the corner onto her street, she saw it first, the glitter of broken glass scattered across the sidewalk in front of the whale's tail. The front window was shattered. The sight of the shattered window punched the air from Stephanie's lungs. Her government-issue sedan was forgotten at the curb. Her feet crunched over a kaleidoscope of broken glass and splintered wood that had once been her front door. The cheerful jingle bell lay bent and silent amidst the wreckage. The inside was a war zone. Books weren't just knocked off shelves, they were shredded, pages ripped and scattered like snow. Her carefully arranged displays were toppled, the armchair slashed, white stuffing bleeding onto the floor. The smell of old paper was choked by the acrid scent of violence. It was a systematic, hateful destruction. This wasn't a burglary. It was a message. Her body went on autopilot, her training overriding the shock. She didn't move from the doorway, her eyes scanning the chaos, assessing the threat. The intruder was likely long gone, but assumption was a killer. The only sound was the cold harbor wind whistling through the broken window. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped inside. Her boots ground on the ruins of her peaceful life. She saw a first edition Hemingway, a gift from her late father, its spine snapped. A cold, hard knot formed in her stomach, pushing aside the initial wave of nausea. This was no longer about Mike O'Malley. This was a declaration of war, delivered on her doorstep. Then she saw it. Propped on the one shelf left standing, centered with mocking precision, was a single sheet of paper. It was a page torn from a book, one of her own books. On it, drawn in thick, black marker, was a crude but unmistakable symbol, a nightingale, its wings spread, impaled by a long knife. The air left her lungs in a quiet hiss. Nightingale. Her old call sign. A name known to only a handful of people at the very highest, most classified levels of the agency. A name buried deep in a file stamped terminated. Markov wasn't just here for Mike. He'd done his homework. He knew exactly who she was. He hadn't just found her, he was taunting her. Telling her he could reach into her past and desecrate her present whenever he wanted. The fear curdled into something else, something cold and sharp and familiar. A grim focus settled over her. She carefully, using 2 fingers, picked up the drawing. She didn't crumple it. She studied it. The pressure of the marker, the confidence of the lines. Arrogance. She looked from the drawing to the devastation around her. The quiet bookshop was a battlefield now. The stakes were no longer about saving a man. They were about survival. Her survival. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her movements precise, deliberate. She didn't call Chief Doug. She scrolled to a number she'd never used, one she'd made Brenda memorize days ago, just in case. The line connected. Brenda? It's Stevie, she said, her voice low, flat, and utterly devoid of its usual warmth. Change of plans. I'm coming over. We need to talk. Now. The O'Malley kitchen smelled of stale coffee and fear. Brenda's hands shook as she poured Stephanie a mug she didn't ask for. The chipped ceramic rattled against the Formica table. They destroyed your shop? Brenda whispered, her face ashen. Because of Mike? Because of me, Stephanie corrected, her voice quiet but iron hard. She didn't touch the coffee. Her posture was ramrod straight, her eyes constantly flicking to the window over the sink, assessing the quiet street. They know who I am, which means they won't stop. We have to get Mike out tonight, during the festival chaos, or we won't get another chance. Brenda's eyes widened in pure terror. We? Stevie, I can't. I don't know how to. You know how to make a scene, Stephanie said, locking eyes with her. That's what I need. But I need a driver too. Someone with a truck who knows the back alleys of this town blindfolded. Brenda looked baffled for a second, then understanding dawned. Gary, Stephanie confirmed. 20 minutes later, the back room of the Salty Dog was thick with the smell of stale beer and nervous tension. Gary leaned against his pool table, arms crossed over his broad chest, his usual easy grin replaced by a deep frown. He listened, his eyes never leaving Stephanie's face, as she laid out the bare bones of the plan. So Brenda causes a distraction at the main gate. Gary, I need you and your truck here, she said, tapping a hand-drawn map spread on the felt. Block this alley. Create a 5-minute traffic jam. That's my window. Gary let out a low whistle. You want me to commit a public nuisance for a jailbreak? Stevie, what in the Sam Hill is going on? Who are you? I'm the person who's going to get Mike back, she said, her gaze level. The rest doesn't matter right now. These men, they're the worst kind. They hurt people for a living. And they're in your town. Brenda reached out, gripping Gary's forearm. Please, Gary. She's the only one who knows what to do. Gary looked from Brenda's desperate face to Stephanie's calm, unwavering one. He rubbed his jaw. A traffic jam. You're not gonna have me, I dunno, shoot anybody. A ghost of a smile touched Stephanie's lips. No, Gary. We're not in a cartoon. I just need you to be a terrible driver for exactly 5 minutes. He stared at the map, then back at her, a slow, grudging respect dawning in his eyes. This wasn't the cute bookseller he flirted with. This was someone else entirely. He let out a long sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire bizarre situation. All right, he grumbled, pushing off the pool table. For Mike. And because I gotta see how this ends. But you owe me a heck of an explanation. And a new copy of Moby Dick. Stephanie gave a single, sharp nod. The team, such as it was assembled. She looked at her watch, then at their scared, determined faces. The festival starts in 3 hours. Get ready. The air over New Bedford was thick with the greasy scent of fried dough and the briny tang of the sea. The seafood festival was in full, deafening swing. A tinny band played an off-key rendition of a Jimmy Buffett song, competing with the roar of the crowd and the hiss of grills. Colored lights strung between lampposts cast a garish glow on the happy, oblivious faces. Stephanie moved through the throngs of people like a ghost. Dressed in a faded denim jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, she was just another local in the crowd. But her eyes weren't on the fried clam stands or the beer tent. They were locked on the hulking, lit-up silhouette of the Atlantic Sustainable Seafood Plant at the far end of the pier, a fortress amidst the carnival. She lifted the small, cheap walkie-talkie to her lips, her voice a calm murmur lost in the din. All right, Brenda. You're on. Remember, heartbroken and furious, not homicidal. Go. A quarter-mile away, Brenda O'Malley took a deep, shuddering breath. She clutched a handmade sign that read, Atlantic Seafood Poisons Our Water, in wobbly letters. She marched toward the plant's main gate, where a single, bored-looking security guard was trying to watch the festival. Her voice, when it came, was a weapon of pure, unleashed anguish. Where is my husband? She shrieked, shoving the sign toward the guard's face. What did you do to him? Your filthy plant killed the fish, and you took my mic. The guard jolted upright, fumbling for his radio as Brenda launched into a spectacular, sobbing meltdown, drawing a stunned crowd of festival-goers. The distraction was perfect. Stephanie didn't wait. Gary. Now. Across the main access road, Gary ground the gears of his old pickup truck. He inched out, then pretended to stall it, right in the middle of the intersection. He threw his hands up in a perfect pantomime of flustered frustration. Dang carburetor, he yelled to the line of cars already starting to honk. He popped the hood, disappearing behind it in a cloud of theatrical steam. A solid wall of traffic began to build instantly. The path to the plant was effectively sealed. Through the walkie, Stephanie could hear the beautiful chaos, Brenda's escalating wails, the blare of car horns, the confused shouts of the gathering crowd. It was a symphony of misdirection. She melted away from the festival lights, slipping into the deep, shadowy alley that ran behind the processing plant. The raucous noise of the crowd faded into a dull roar, replaced by the industrial hum of generators and the chill coming off the harbor. The back of the plant was dark, littered with discarded pallets and overflowing dumpsters. She was in. The clock was ticking. Somewhere in that humming metal beast, Mike O'Malley was running out of time. She approached a heavy, unmarked service door, her lockpicks already cool and familiar in her hand. The service door clicked open with a soft, final sigh. Stephanie slipped inside, the world of fried food and laughter vanishing, replaced by the sterile, humming chill of the plant. The air was a slap of cold, smelling of chlorine, fish, and wet metal. Industrial lights cast long, stark shadows across a labyrinth of stainless steel conveyors and hulking machinery, all silent now. She moved like a whisper, her boots making no sound on the slick floor. Her eyes scanned for cameras, her mind overlaying the blueprint she'd memorized from her fake inspection. Left at the brine tank, straight past the packaging station, follow the hum of the compressor. A sudden, sharp clang echoed from around a corner. Stephanie froze, pressing herself against a cold metal surface. Two men in plant coveralls, not security, walked past, arguing about a football game, their voices echoing in the cavernous space. She held her breath until their footsteps faded. Amateurs. Complacent. She found the heavy, insulated door of the main freezer unit. A thick padlock hung from the latch, but it was open, just looped through, not clicked shut. Sloppy. Markov's arrogance. He didn't think anyone would get this far. She slid the lock out slowly, the metal groaning faintly. Pulling the heavy door open just a crack, a plume of freezing air misted around her. "Mike," she hissed into the darkness. A weak, chattering groan answered from the back. Huddled behind a pallet of frozen fish sticks was Mike O'Malley, his face pale, his lips blue. He was shivering violently, wrapped in a thin layer of plastic sheeting. "Sie came for the fish sticks, did ya?" he stammered, a flicker of defiance in his glazed eyes. A dry chuckle escaped her. "Something like that. Can you walk?" A voice, smooth as oil, cut through the cold from behind her. "I'm afraid his reservation has been extended." Stephanie turned slowly. Markov stood there, not in a coverall, but in a sleek black jacket. He looked exactly as she remembered from the dossier, cold eyes, a thin, cruel smile. He held a pistol, fitted with a long silencer, pointed squarely at her chest. "The Great Nightingale," he said, his accent thick. "Reduced to a librarian. I saw your shop." A fitting end for a washed-up relic. Stephanie didn't move. Her hands were at her sides. Her heart was a steady, slow drumbeat. She saw the confidence in his posture, the way he held the weapon like an extension of his arm. He was waiting for her to beg, to show fear. Instead, she smiled. It was a small, cold thing. Librarians know how to make a lot of noise when it counts. Her foot, in a movement too fast to track, kicked a loose metal valve on a compressed air line next to her. It released with a deafening, explosive hiss that ripped through the quiet hum of the plant. Markov flinched, his aim wavering for a split second. It was all she needed. She lunged forward, not away from the gun, but inside its arc. Her hand chopped down on his wrist with surgical precision. The gun clattered to the floor. He grunted in surprise, swinging at her with his other hand. She ducked under the blow, driving her shoulder into his ribs, hearing the satisfying oof of air leaving his lungs. He was bigger, stronger. He grabbed her jacket, trying to throw her into the machinery. She let him use the momentum, twisting, using his own strength to slam him face first into the cold steel wall of the freezer with a sickening thud. He slid down, dazed. In one fluid motion, she grabbed a stiff, frozen mackerel from a nearby crate. "This is for my copy of War and Peace," she muttered, and brought it down on the back of his head with a solid, thawing thwack. He went still. Breathing heavily, steam puffing from her lips in the cold air, she dragged his limp form into the freezer, past a stunned Mike. She propped him against a wall. She looked at Mike, his eyes wide with shock and cold. "Time to go," she said, her voice calm again, as if she'd just recommended a good book. She slammed the heavy freezer door shut and slid the padlock home with a decisive click. The furious, muffled pounding from inside started immediately. She grabbed Mike's arm, pulling him up. "We have about 90 seconds before that fire alarm I pulled brings the whole town running. Let's move." The piercing shriek of the fire alarm was a physical thing, shredding the night air. Across the festival grounds, cheers turned to confused shouts. The tinny music cut out. Lights flickered and strobed. Perfect chaos. Stephanie half-dragged, half-supported Mike O'Malley through the shadowy alley behind the plant. He was a dead weight, his legs numb with cold, his breath coming in ragged, fogging gasps. "Almost there," she muttered, more to herself than to him. Her eyes scanned the converging emergency lights, calculating a path away from the main stampede of people flowing toward the commotion. She spotted Gary's truck, right where it was supposed to be, idling in a side alley, its headlights off. Gary himself was out of the cab, his face a mask of anxiety under the dim light. He saw them and his eyes went wide. "Holy smokes," he breathed, rushing forward to grab Mike's other arm. Together, they muscled the shivering fisherman into the passenger seat of the cab. Mike collapsed against the window, his eyes closed. "Brenda?" Stephanie asked, her voice sharp. She melted into the crowd once the cops showed up. "She's fine. Are you okay?" Gary's eyes roamed over her, looking for blood, for injury. She looked perfectly normal, except for the fierce, cold light in her eyes. "I'm fine. Get him home. Now. Don't stop for anything. What are you gonna do?" "My part's done," she said, already stepping back into the shadows. "Go." She didn't wait for his reply. She turned and walked away, not running, just moving with a swift, purposeful stride. She kept to the darkest edges of the streets, a ghost slipping through the panicked, confused edges of the festival crowd. Sirens wailed, growing closer, red and blue lights painting the buildings in frantic strokes. She reached the whale's tail. The shattered window gaped like a wound. She unlocked the mangled door and stepped inside, the crunch of glass under her boots the only sound in the hollow space. The alarm was still blaring 2 blocks away. She didn't turn on the lights. She found a dustpan and brush behind the counter and began to sweep. The motion was mechanical, rhythmic. She swept the glittering shards into a neat pile. She righted a toppled bookshelf. She picked up a shredded copy of a John le Carré novel, her mouth a thin line. The frantic energy of the fight began to leach out of her, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She could still hear the faint echo of the sirens, the distant, confused buzz of the crowd. The aftermath was unfolding without her. Markov was trapped. Mike was safe. Keith was likely sweating under the glare of state police lights. She was just a shopkeeper with a mess to clean up. She looked at the devastation around her, at the pile of broken glass. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a hollowed-out quiet. The job was done, but the cost was scattered across her floor. She leaned the broom against the counter and finally allowed herself to just breathe in the ruin of the life she'd built. The quiet was back, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the silence after the storm. The morning sun streamed through the brand-new plate glass window of the whale's tail, painting a bright, clean rectangle on the freshly swept floor. The smell of sawdust and fresh paint still hung in the air, mixing with the familiar scent of paper and peace. Stephanie ran a cloth along a newly stocked shelf, her movements calm, deliberate. The bell jingled. Chief Doug stood there, his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. He took in the repaired shop. "Place looks good, Stevie. Better than new." "Insurance is a wonderful thing, Chief," she said, not stopping her work. He cleared his throat. "Quite a night. That fella they pulled from the freezer at the plant. Turns out he's got a red notice from Interpol. Nasty piece of work." And Keith, the manager, he's singing like a canary to the feds about dumping and other things. He looked at her a long, knowing look. Town's a lot quieter thanks to whoever was involved. Stephanie just smiled faintly and placed a book perfectly aligned on the shelf. Must have been quite a fisherman's tale. The door jingled again. Gary came in, carrying 2 steaming coffee cups from his shop. He handed one to Stephanie. No flirty grin, just a solid, respectful nod. Heard Mike's home. Doctors say he'll be okay. Just needs to warm up, Gary said. That's good news, Stephanie said, taking the coffee. Their eyes met, and a whole conversation passed in the silence. He didn't ask questions. He just knew. Later, Brenda and a wrapped-up Mike came in. Brenda threw her arms around Stephanie in a fierce hug. Mike, still pale, managed a weak smile. Brenda says I owe you my life, Stevie. Don't quite remember much of it. Felt like a bad dream. Just glad you're home, Mike, she said, patting his arm gently. We all are. Finally alone, Stephanie sat on her stool behind the counter. She took a slow sip of coffee black, just how she liked it. She looked around her shop. The books stood in orderly rows. The sun was warm. The bell on the door was just a bell. She picked up the new copy of the Nordic noir she'd been trying to read for a week. This time, the words didn't blur. The quiet of the shop wasn't a cage anymore. It was a blanket. It was a piece she hadn't just found, but one she'd fought for and won. She was Stephanie Miller, bookseller. And she was exactly where she was supposed to be. A small, genuine smile finally reached her eyes. It was enough. Love this mission? Don't miss the next one. Hit like and subscribe for more.